of anger. Jake sat in his small, cluttered apartment, the weight of the day pressing down on him like an iron vice. The flickering fluorescent light overhead did little to dispel the shadows that seemed to crowd in on him. He could feel it building inside him, that familiar surge of anger, bubbling up from some dark, hidden place within. It always started small, a slight tightening in his chest, a quickening of his breath. He'd managed to keep it at bay for years, burying it under layers of forced calm and practiced indifference. But tonight was different. Tonight, the pressure was too much. His phone buzzed on the table, the sound like a jolt of electricity through his frayed nerves. He ignored it, trying to focus on the cracks in the ceiling instead. But the buzzing continued, relentless, insistent. He grabbed the phone, his hand trembling, and saw the name flashing on the screen. Mark. The sight of his brother's name sent a fresh wave of anger crashing through him. He wanted to answer, to scream, to let all the frustration and pain spill out. Instead, he hurled the phone across the room, watching with a detached sense of satisfaction as it shattered against the wall, pieces scattering like shards of his own broken control. Jake stood, his breath coming in ragged gasps, and paced the small space. His mind raced, memories and thoughts swirling in a chaotic whirlpool. He thought about all the times he'd held back, biting his tongue, forcing a smile, swallowing his anger. He thought about the years of feeling powerless, trapped in a cycle he couldn't break. And then, something snapped. He grabbed the nearest object, a heavy glass ashtray, and hurled it at the wall. The sound of breaking glass was like a release, a cathartic explosion of all the pent-up rage. But it wasn't enough. He needed more. He needed to feel something break, to see the tangible results of his fury. He turned to the glass coffee table in the center of the room. With a primal roar, he brought his fist down on it, the sound of shattering glass mingling with his own shout. Pain shot through his hand, but he welcomed it, relished it. It was real, tangible, a physical manifestation of the storm inside him. For a moment, he stood there, chest heaving, staring at the wreckage around him. And then he saw his reflection in the shards of glass, a distorted, fragmented image of a man on the brink. The sight brought him back to reality, the gravity of what he'd done crashing down on him like a tidal wave. Jake sank to the floor, his anger spent, replaced by a crushing sense of despair. He realized, with a cold clarity, how close he'd come to losing control entirely, and he understood, for the first time, how easily that line could be crossed. Then came the knock at the door. His friend Tim stood there, eyes wide with concern. Jake let him in, his mind still reeling. "Jake, what happened? You look like you've been through hell," Tim said, taking in the shattered glass and the raw emotion on Jake's face. I lost it, Tim. I really lost it," Jake admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Tim nodded, understanding. "Man, I get it. Sometimes it feels like you're gonna explode, but you can't let it out. And when you do, it's like you're a volcano." Jake looked at him, seeing a reflection of his own struggles. "Yeah, but what scares me is how easy it is to tip over the edge. How if I was with someone else, and I lost it, they might absorb my anger and act out on it, even if I wouldn't. It's like a vicious circle." Tim sighed, shaking his head. "You've got to be shitting me. You're having a bloody laugh, aren't you? You think that because someone else might lose it, it's on you? No shit, Sherlock. Everyone's responsible for their own actions. If they lose their shit, that's on them. But what if they do?" Jake asked, voice rising. "What if my anger makes them do something I'd never do?" "You're stupid if you believe that. If you think you're the cause of someone else's actions, you're just making excuses for them. You need to control your own shit, not worry about theirs." Jake let Tim's words sink in, a harsh but necessary truth. He realized that while he needed to manage his anger, he couldn't take responsibility for others' actions. The cycle had to end with him. As he sat there, surrounded by the remnants of his outburst, he thought about all the people who lived on that edge, teetering between control and chaos. He thought about how thin the veneer of civility really was, how quickly it could be stripped away to reveal the raw, untamed emotions beneath. Jake knew he had to find a way to break the cycle, to confront the anger that lurked within him before it consumed him entirely. He didn't want to be another statistic, another person who let their rage define them. He wanted to be more than that, to find a way to channel his anger into something constructive, something that wouldn't leave him shattered and broken. He took a deep breath, feeling the remnants of his anger ebb away, replaced by a grim determination. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew he had to try. For his own sake, and for the sake of those around him, he had to find a way to step back from the edge, to reclaim control before it was too late. Jake stood, wincing at the pain in his hand, and began to clean up the mess he'd made. It was a small, tentative step, but it was a start. And sometimes, that's all you need to begin to change. In the days that followed, Jake threw himself into finding ways to manage his anger. He started with the basics: deep breathing exercises, meditation, and physical activity. Every morning, he would run for miles, pounding the pavement as if he could outrun his demons. The physical exertion helped, burning off some of the restless energy that threatened to consume him. He also sought help. He joined a support group for people struggling with anger issues. It felt strange at first, sitting in a circle of strangers, sharing his deepest fears and frustrations. But gradually, he found solace in their shared experiences. He realized he wasn't alone in his struggle, and that understanding brought a measure of peace. One evening, after a particularly intense group session, Jake found himself sitting in a dimly lit coffee shop, nursing a cup of tea. His phone buzzed, and he saw a message from Tim. "How's it going, man? Holding up okay?" Jake smiled faintly and typed back, "Yeah, getting there, one step at a time." As he put his phone away, he noticed a young woman at the next table, her face a mask of stress and frustration. She was muttering to herself, fingers tapping agitatedly on the table. Jake recognized the signs: the tight jaw, the rapid breathing. He saw a reflection of his own struggle in her. He hesitated for a moment, then stood and approached her. "Hey, you okay?" he asked gently. She looked up, startled, then shook her head. "No, not really. Just, everything's too much sometimes, you know." Jake nodded. "Yeah, I do. Believe me, I get it. Sometimes it feels like you're going to lose it, and everything's just spinning too fast." She looked at him, eyes wide with surprise. "Yeah, exactly. How do you deal with it?" Jake sat down, taking a deep breath. "It's not easy, but I've found a few things that help. Breathing exercises, for one, and running. It helps to burn off the energy. But the biggest thing is talking about it, not keeping it bottled up." She nodded slowly. "That makes sense. I always try to handle it on my own, but it's not working." "You don't have to do it alone," Jake said. "There are people who can help. Support groups, therapy. It's not a sign of weakness to ask for help. Sometimes, it's the strongest thing you can do." She smiled, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Thanks. Maybe I'll give it a try." Jake returned her smile, feeling a sense of purpose. Helping her had reminded him why he was doing this, why it was so important to break the cycle, for his sake, and for the sake of others. Over the next few weeks, Jake continued to work on himself. He read books on anger management, attended his support group regularly, and even started seeing a therapist. The progress was slow, and there were setbacks, but each day he felt a little more in control, and every time he felt the anger rising, he remembered Tim's words. "You're having a bloody laugh, aren't you? No shit, Sherlock. Everyone's responsible for their own actions." He repeated those words to himself like a mantra, a reminder that he had the power to choose his response. One evening, as he was leaving his therapist's office, Jake saw Tim waiting outside. They walked together in silence for a while. Then Tim turned to him. "You've come a long way, man. I'm proud of you." Jake smiled, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. "Thanks, Tim. I couldn't have done it without you." Tim shrugged. "You did the